get started. So welcome everybody to our webinar today on getting the most out of OpenBook. So I'm Rebecca Clark and I'm based in our Sydney office, and Peter is our manager up in our Queensland office, who many of you may well know. So I'll just go through a couple of housekeeping points for those of you who might not have joined one of our webinars before. So we may make sure your web microphones are muted during parts of the webinar, but we will be stopping for questions. And at that point, you're more than welcome to unmute yourselves, or we'll unmute you and you can speak. Peter will be sharing his webcam, so you can enlarge the size of that image if you're a mouse user, and you can drag the right hand edge of the image to make that larger if it's just coming up pretty small. You can, as well as verbally asking questions, you can enter chat messages in the chat box at the bottom of the interface, or you can send me an email, because some areas are not very accessible, unfortunately, and we are recording the webinar and we'll make it available afterwards for you. So if you just need to give us a little bit of time to sort that out. So I will hand over to Peter and he can tell you all about different features of OpenBook to help you make the most of it. So just a moment.
Oh, great. Okay. Good afternoon all. I'm Peter Cracknell from the Brisbane office. I hope you can hear me okay. If there are any audio problems, if you could just send a chat message to Rebecca. Sometimes we do get internet dropping in and out, so bear with us if we lose a little bit of communication, but normally it runs pretty smoothly. So I'm going to be talking about OpenBook today. Before I do go into some of the features of OpenBook, I'd just like to explain a bit about what it is and how it fits into other programs and products that we do. So OpenBook is a software program. It's actually been around in its earliest incarnations for many, many years. It was one of the first PC-based scanning optical character recognition programs. I remember first seeing it back in, I think, 1994, I think was the first time I saw OpenBook. So it was one of the very earliest of the scanning programs. And of course it's developed over the years, become refined. But its purpose is to work with a scanner, a flatbed scanner usually, but also with the Pearl camera scanner, to acquire printed material and to put that into the interface in OpenBook and read that out loud through the speech synthesizer that comes with OpenBook. So it means that a vision impaired person or a blind person can scan in documents, books, paperwork, and have it spoken out loud by the computer, plus a range of other features that I'll talk about in a moment. But I'd like to put that into context with other scanning solutions first. We have long had scanners that you plug into the mains, you open the lid and put your book or your document in. There is a computer in the scanner, and in about a minute or so the scanner will be reading out loud. And one of the earliest ones of that sort was the Sarah. So the Sarah was essentially a very large flatbed scanner where you lifted the lid, put the paperwork in as if you're taking a photocopy. But instead of taking a photocopy, of course, what it does is it reads out loud the contents of the document. In time, the Sarah actually incorporated OpenBook as its scanning program. Even though you wouldn't actually see the program running, you'd be hearing the result of the scan. And since Sarah, there have been many incarnations of scanners. We have some that are like our Clearview Speech, for example. And I'm sorry, I don't have a good internet image of it, so I'll just show you from our catalogue here, for those of you that are able to see this. In the Clearview Speech here, it's a fairly large desktop unit where you can place your document underneath it, it gets scanned, and then it's read out loud from the screen, but also shown in large on the screen. And the Clearview Speech is a terrific device because you can actually point to the area that you want read out loud, just the block you want read out loud. The downside of the Clearview Speech, of course, it's not very portable. So instead of what I want to look at today is more the portable products and programs like OpenBook that give you more flexibility so that you can take it perhaps with a laptop out and about, as well as using it in your office or your school. So before I show you OpenBook, let me just show you a couple of other things that are also portable. We have here our Clear Reader. This is it's got a computer in it, a couple of speakers and a camera arm. And the purpose of this is again to scan and acquire documents. And it's quite simple controls on the top. Just a pause play button, a rewind fast forward, speed control and a volume control here.
Volume up.
So it's actually a very straightforward scanning system, very popular with the people who are totally blind. You place your book in front of it, press a button, and within about 10 seconds it's reading out loud for you. So this is an example of a very portable but very simple to use scanner reader. It's called the Clear Reader. So it has many advantages in that it's very simple to use. One disadvantage that it has compared to, say, OpenBook is that you don't attach a keyboard or type file names or save files in a computer type way. You save them in another way. What you actually do is you use your own voice to record a file name, which is just your voice tag, so that though you can save multiple documents, you can actually have a meaningful name for that file. If I was to just scan a document with a Clear Reader and not give it a voice tag, the name of the file would be something like 26/6/17 1513, which would be a date and time stamp, plus a few words, which were the very few words at the top of the document. But that might be just completely accidental. It might have nothing to do with the real meaning of the document. It might be ABN, or it might be chapter 6 or something like that. So though there are advantages to having a simple system, you do lose some of the sophistication that you will get with OpenBook. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Other systems that we have that are portable. We have our MagniLink scanner. Now the MagniLink is a fold-up camera that if you place paperwork underneath it and connect this to either a Macintosh or a PC, like OpenBook, you can actually acquire documents into the MagniLink software and have them read out loud. So this is a very portable fold-up scanner. It does have extra features. It has the ability to use the camera to zoom in on distant objects too. So for people with vision or low vision, you can actually use it to magnify like a CCTV on your laptop screen. So this has got a dual purpose, scanning and recognition of documents, but also magnification of objects. And another new system that we have, which is called the Mercury 12, is a Windows 10 laptop computer in an enclosure which it can fold into for portability, that also becomes a reading stand. So with the Mercury 12, we can actually place our documents underneath the screen, start the Mercury program. It can either magnify the paperwork, or when you press the OCR button, and OCR stands for optical character recognition, it will convert the document that's underneath it to spoken text on the screen here. So this would seem to be a very powerful system for portable scanning, because it incorporates a computer as well, so you've got all the benefits of a computer. But its manipulation of the scanned document is much more basic than that we can achieve with OpenBook. So with all of these things, there'll be certain features that will suit certain people and certain features that will suit other people. Where OpenBook comes in is its ability to give many more sophisticated features for people that are doing quite a lot of scanning. The other things I've shown you are really more intended for occasional scanning. but not for heavy-duty multi-page scanning. And that's where OpenBook comes in. So I'm just going to just go to the OpenBook program.
OpenBook 9.0.
And I'll show my screen.
9.0.
And for those of you that can see that screen, it's not very exciting. It's just looks like a document with a menu across the top. And OpenBook, say its purpose is to both provide speech from print documents, but also to manipulate the large print aspect of it. Because OpenBook can be used as a low vision device as well as a blindness program. And when I say that, I mean that it can be driven by somebody who has no sight, but it can also be a benefit for people who have some sight. If anybody has any comments, just chip in as we go, and just let Rebecca know if you need me to speed up, slow down, or go back over anything, or just chip in just on voice and let us know how we're going.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah.
So what we do with OpenBook, I've got this installed on a Windows 10 computer. It only runs on Windows computers. It won't run on the Macintosh computer. It's not Android or iPad. It's just for Windows. What we do is we connect some kind of a scanner. Now, a scanner can be a flatbed scanner, or it could be one of those multifunction scanners that you're only connected to on a network, or it could be a dedicated scanner like our Pearl scanner. Now, our Pearl scanner looks very similar to the MagniLink that I showed you. It folds up, and it's designed to be a very lightweight portable scanner that can attach through USB to your laptop. And a lot of the benefits of OpenBook are that it can be run on a very lightweight laptop, so you can take it about with you in the workplace or in study as a reading solution. So the process for scanning is, the first thing we need to do is we need to go to the menu for Advanced. And I did that. I'm cheating. I'm using the mouse, but it will be perfectly possible to use the keyboard.
Launch, Advanced, Setting, Advanced.
I'm just using arrow keys to move through the menus. Which reminds me, a lot of our OpenBook users are also, of course, JAWS users or Zoom Text users or Magic users. They use other assistive technology, and the two OpenBook will work perfectly well with those programs. But what you might choose to do is tell your JAWS, for example, to switch off its speech when OpenBook is running. Otherwise, you'll get double voicing. You'll get JAWS speaking and you'll get OpenBook speaking at the same time. So generally speaking, with Zoom Text or JAWS, we will just go to the configuration of those programs to tell them that when they detect that OpenBook is running, just to turn off their speech synthesizer. So what we'll do is, I'm just in the menus here and I'm in the advanced menu, because I'd like to go down a couple of steps
Device selection.
To device selection, and this is where we can tell it which scanner we're going to use.
Device selection dialog. Acquisition source, combo box scanner.
And if I had a scanner attached and I clicked then on the acquisition source, it would show me under the device any scanners that have been attached or are currently attached in a list. And this is how, for example, you might have a scanner attached on your network. You could just scroll down the list till you get to the one that you want, press enter, and then OpenBook will use that as its scanning source.
No scanner. Out of dialog.
So that's the first thing we do. The next thing I'm going to show you is the process of doing a simple scan. So what we do is we can either go to the menus or we can press some of the shortcut keys that OpenBook has. The shortcut key that OpenBook has always had for many, many years is that the space bar is the scan button. What that is to acquire a page. So with the paperwork flat down in our flatbed scanner, or with the Pearl face up, looking up at the camera, all squared up, we then press the space bar and OpenBook will take a shot of that page or scan that page. and it will then pour it into the viewing area that we see here. And this is one that I prepared earlier. It's just a scan from Mark Twain, and we can see it here on the screen just as it was scanned, with page numbers and so on, and with the font. It is basically just as if I'd photocopied it. I can then ask that to be read out loud. Now, the key we use for this is the F12 key.
Like it? Well, I don't see why I oughtn't to like it. Does a boy get a chance to whitewash a fence every day? Put the thing in a new light. Ben stopped nibbling his apple.
And I can pause it with the F12 key too. So the F12 key is one of the few function keys we need to know with OpenBook. All of these things can also be done through the menus too. If I want to scan another page, I could just press the space bar and it would append the new page to the end of this page. So it would become page 2 or page 3 and so on. Now there are other ways of doing this, and I'll be going through those in a moment. But before I go through that, I'll just show you some of the basic navigation controls with OpenBook. The arrow keys
Yes. Nibbling. Stop.
allow us to move
Light.
either backwards
Stop.
or forwards by word or by line.
Swept his brush daintily back and forth, step back to over. Effect added a touch here and there. Criticize the effect again then.
I can also use things like the home key.
Please note dialog. Out of dialog.
Depends on your computer. I'm using a Windows Surface Pro, and some of my function keys are double function. So this will work better when you've got a full keyboard with proper page up, page down, home and end and all those sorts of things.
Quick add here, touch what you absorbed.
For example, if I want to go to page 2, I could press Control Page Down. Not page down, but Control Page Down. And that would take me to the top of page 2. Now, one of the powerful features of OpenBook that is, if you like, missing in some of the other options I've shown you is the ability to treat this like a word processed document now. So I've got some search features I can use. I can use, for example, Control F.
Find text dialog. Find what? Edit box.
And I have an edit box that I can type text into. So if I'm looking for the word aunt,
A-U-N-T.
Found. Out.
that will find the first occurrence of the word aunt. If I press the enter key again,
Found. Out.
it'll find the next occurrence of it. If I wish to read the context that is in,
Read sentence.
Ben, I'd like to. Honest to Jim, but Aunt Polly well. Jim wanted to do it, but she wouldn't let.
so this is a powerful feature. You can imagine that we had a 30-page document and we were looking for a particular word or a sequence of words. This Control F find text feature is very, very powerful for study or for work. And this is something we can't do with our other scanner systems. Though they're simpler, they don't have the ability to use the keyboard to use these kind of features. All good so far?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, thanks.
Good. So the sort of people that use OpenBook would be either students who have just got a heap of reading to do, they've got to scan a lot of stuff, and they've got to read through it quite quickly. They've got to skim, they've got to quickly find things. Can you imagine if we were doing this with another sort of scanner where you'd have to listen sequentially through everything before you got to what you wanted to hear? It just wouldn't be efficient. We have a number of people who are lawyers and so on who use OpenBook for much the same reason. They want to quickly find parts in their case notes and so on.
Out of dialogue.
So I also have one of my customers works in a call center, and he's able to use OpenBook to, first of all, quickly find customer details that he's scanned in, but then also to annotate some of the forms that he's scanned in with highlight. He can actually go in and use the highlight tools to mark up with yellow or green highlight perhaps somebody's credit card number or something like that, and then when he prints to the irregular ink printer, then that will be shown with the highlights shown in yellow, green and so on. So he's then participating in the normal work practices. He hasn't had to have any real special modifications to the forms that everybody else is using, and so he's actually just using OpenBook to fit into existing work practices. All right, so I'm going to get into some of the different vision views now of OpenBook. So obviously this will be applied to people with low vision rather than people who are totally blind. But there are many people who are low vision people using OpenBook, or sighted people who are supporting people who are using OpenBook. And I'll give you an example of that. We have here at the State Library of Queensland, the OpenBook is installed there, and some of the materials there are very faded newspaper copies, and the staff there can actually inspect the quality of the scan to see why OpenBook might be having issues with a particular scan. And the sorts of issues that we can get with any scanner, and OpenBook is no different, is poorly faded materials, creased materials, things with stains, coffee stains, that sort of thing, perhaps very poor reproductions through photocopies and so on. And they will appear with different speckles through the background or different dark patches. And with OpenBook, we can actually change the view to see what the original looked like and what the resultant text looks like to OpenBook. So I'm going to go to the View menu here.
View.
And for those of you that can see my screen, the exact view is highlighted. That means that what you're seeing is pretty much the result of the original scan. This was from a book here, so it's fairly even background, but you can imagine a newspaper would be a lot grainier than this. What we can do though is we can have a split view.
Leaving menus. Split view.
And we can adjust the size of the split. In the top section of my screen, I'm seeing a consistent font, which is something that we can adjust with high contrast features and so on. It's also showing you what OpenBook thinks it is hearing or seeing. Now, there haven't been many mistakes in this OpenBook scan. I'll see if I can find any, but I can't at the moment. But if there had been some error, you'd have seen it in the top screen as what OpenBook thinks it should be, and in the bottom screen as what the photographic image is. And you'll notice that the two cursors, the yellow blocks, are synchronized. That means that as I move through the top document with my arrow keys, that's reflected in the bottom document too. So I can do some things to the top screen from a low vision point of view, but still see the original context below. So I'm just going to do some of that now. To do this, I'm going to go to the menus,
File,
and I'm going to go across to the low vision menu.
Edit, Acquire, View, Tools, Launch, Advanced Setting, Low Vision, Size.
And we can do stuff to the size, colors, the kind of yellow spotlight, fonts, and so on. So I'm just going to enter on the size to start with.
Low Vision Settings dialog. Increase Size button.
And the button that it's focused on is the increase size button, so I'm going to press that now.
Larger.
And I just pressed enter here. I could have pressed click with the mouse.
Larger.
I'm just going to move my controls out of the way.
OpenBook 9.0. Increase Size button. Larger.
And for those of you that can see my screen, you'll notice that as I make the top part larger, it's still readable, because what it's doing is word wrapping. It's just making the column longer, and the print is still flowing, and I can still read it. I'm just going to close this box.
Out of dialog.
Tom can sit, but he ought to know. No, I reckon it wouldn't hurt. You see, on about.
And as I move down through this document with my down arrow key,
you know, but if it was the back fence
it's still completely readable in the top screen, and it's just flowing and word wrapped. And this is a very powerful feature of OpenBook. It contrasts to perhaps using, say, a Word document or something like that with magnification. If we had magnified a Word document with zoom text, we would actually have an effect a bit like a closed circuit TV, where we would have to scroll back and forth to read these much magnified lines. But with OpenBook, we can have it all contained within the screen size, and it's just an up and down arrow movement.
That she's awful particular about this fence.
Now, you've noticed there were some other things we can do to this view. We can change the colours.
White on black, green on black.
And choose from colour combinations that suit the vision or the low vision condition. And the really nice thing about this with OpenBook is that it doesn't matter what I scan. I can have this as my preferred setting, so that every document I can see in this kind of view. If I like green on black and a certain magnification, or perhaps with a different font.
Font Arial narrow, Times New Roman.
Then I can have that for all of my documents. I can also adjust the spacing.
More spacing.
And this might suit people who have tracking difficulties. It may also have a bearing on people who have reading difficulties like dyslexia and so on. So these are all what they call low vision settings, but they may have applications elsewhere. I'm just going to leave that on that at the moment, there like that. But this would be an example where perhaps somebody who's assisting might, they might be called over in a library situation or something like that, and the totally blind OpenBook user would say, look, it just doesn't make sense. I don't understand why this word isn't making sense. And when the support person looks at it, they'll say, yes, in your top screen, that seems to be garbage. And I can tell you why, because I'm looking at the split view. There's a huge coffee stain going right through that word, and that's what's corrupting it, and that's why it's not working for you. Now, in some situations where there seems to be a consistently bad scan, there are things we can do to tweak the scanning process. And I'll just take you into some of those now. We have in OpenBook the idea of workflow, and I'm just going to explain how this works. So the workflow that we're using at the moment is the default, the preset workflow. What this means is what happens when I press the space bar. The default for OpenBook is it just acquires a page and it just appends it to whatever other pages are there. So that's the default acquire a page workflow. If you like, you can think of it like presets or configuration files. So if I go to the Acquire menu,
Acquire.
Some of the very common presets are there listed in that menu.
Acquire a page.
And it tells me that the Acquire a page default is F4 or space. And I've already mentioned about the space bar. And so that spacebar is always available for that. But it also mentioned that F4 was available. And I should just point out why F4 is available, the function key 4. And that is because sometimes people have OpenBook set to edit mode. I'm just going to quickly do that now. I'm going to go to the edit menu, and I'm going to switch it to edit mode. Now you won't notice much of a difference.
Edit mode.
But edit mode means that we actually now have a typing cursor. It would be possible for me to type
A-E-L space
as if I was in a word processor. I could not have done that when I was in read-only mode because I didn't have a typing cursor. So if people are using that perhaps as a simple word processor or perhaps to make minor corrections, you can imagine that maybe most of the documents scanned really well, but there were just a couple of things where it had misinterpreted a word. You could just pop in here, make the correction in edit mode, and then you could save that file, and next time you listen to it, it would be correct. It would sound correct, and in your large print view, it would look correct. it would have no bearing on the image below. There would be no change to the scanned image that we see below, the exact view. This is something to bear in mind. It won't actually affect the image there. But in the underlying text, the text that we're seeing in the top view, that would be corrected by the user. Now the point here is that if I press spacebar, it is just a space. And that's why we need to have the F4 key available as a quick key to scan if you're in edit mode.
Space.
So I'm going to pop back to the usual, the read-only mode.
Read-only mode.
And now, of course, we don't have a typing cursor.
Read-only
We
mode.
have instead just the ability to move a whole word at a time.
She's hello. She's hello.
You see, for those of you who can see, on the top screen I'm on the word hello, but I still cannot see the word hello on the original document because it's something we've added in.
Yes, hello. She's.
This is a trap sometimes. Sometimes people wonder why it's saying these things, but it's not apparent in the lower screen. Okay, so coming back to workflow.
Acquire.
Some of the presets are listed here in the menu. Acquire a page, acquire and replace current page. This is where you want this always to be page 1 and you just want it to be overwritten by the new scan. Sometimes you may have scanned 20 pages, but one of them didn't work well, and you might want to go to page 15
Acquire and insert new page
and pop it in before the current page or after the current page. So this is like inserting a row in a table or something like that. It's also possible to
recognize submenu,
re-recognize the page or the whole document.
Check orientation.
What does this mean? Check orientation means that you may have put it upside down and you might be wondering why you're getting gibberish, and this would tell you that the page is the right way up. I'm just going to try it here.
Acquisition source.
Of course I can't because I don't have the scanner attached.
Acquire.
So this will tell you before you actually perform the scan, yep, it's the right way up. Normally OpenBook is set to automatically check all possible orientations because of course someone who's blind may not know that they put it in the wrong way around. They just want it to work. The
Recognize columns check.
The next option is recognize columns, and this is an important feature that's normally checked all the time. So if we put a magazine or a newspaper or even a book with 2 faces, OpenBook sees that normally as 2 or 3 or 4 columns, and it will simply append the columns in the order from left to right. It will scan and recognize the left column, and then it will see the column to the right of that and add it to the end of that, and then the 3rd and the 4th column and so on. And that's, of course, that's fine. That's what you normally want it to do. But there are cases when you don't want it to do that. You can imagine there might be a table of information, and a classic example would be a bank statement, which is a table. And you do not want it to read the left column of dates first and then the debits and the credits and the balance, because there's no connection. What you want to do is force OpenBook to read across the row, to not recognize columns, just to read it as it is from top to bottom. So here we can very easily just turn the recognize columns off if we know that there are no columns on the document. What we can't do is we can't have the best of both worlds. We can't have some of it, any embedded tables recognized as tables and then any columns in the same page recognized as columns. We can't mix and match. We have to give it the one rule for that page. So, and oftentimes we just can't achieve a perfect result because we've got mixed things on the page. I just saw Stephanie, I think you put a question about how does a non-sighted person, a blind person, navigate through the menus and so on without using the mouse and so on. Well, to get to the menus in OpenBook, it's just a standard Windows menu. I'll just come back out of it.
Menus.
I simply press the Alt key on the keyboard. That's to the left of the spacebar.
File.
And it lands on the very first menu, and that's spoken. I then use my left or right arrows to move across the menus.
Edit, acquire, view, acquire, edit, file.
Or I pull down a menu by pressing the down arrow.
File. Open audio and close. Save. Save as.
I'm just moving now through the file menu, and this is just typical of any other Windows program where the thing you arrive at is spoken by the speech synthesizer in OpenBook. OpenBook will also indicate what the shortcut keys are for these things too. While I'm here in this menu, before I carry on with the workflows, I'm just going to point out some features in this file menu. The ability to save the file or to save as. So we could have scanned a multi-page document and want to save it either as an OpenBook type file, so we can listen to it in OpenBook another time. And that's what would happen if we hit save. It would ask for a file name, and it would assume that we want to save it as an OpenBook, an OBX type file. Now that can only be read in OpenBook. An OpenBook file includes both the image, the original facsimile, and the recognized text together. So those two components are stored in the OpenBook file. But I could have chosen to save it in other formats too. I could choose to
select a file to save to dialog. File name, edit box, files type, combo box, OpenBook docs star.obx.
and that's an OBX, that's the default.
OpenBook docs star.obx.
But I could also choose to save it as a text file, as a Word document, and that's quite powerful to do it that way, as a rich text file, as HTML, a WordPerfect file. And so this way I could then save it also, not just in those formats, but to, of course, to a location like a memory stick or to somewhere on the network. And all of that is spoken, so once again a blind person could navigate that just using the keyboard. Going back to the file menu.
File. New.
Another thing we can do is we can transmit the file to a note taker. This could be like a Braille note taker, like a Braille note or something like that, or to a Braille embosser.
Submenu.
If we had a Braille embosser attached or via the network, we could actually Braille directly from OpenBook because it has its own grade 2 Braille translator built in. So it wouldn't be necessary to have Duxbury or anything like that. We could actually go direct from here to an embosser with grade 2 Braille. Or, and this is I think a very powerful feature,
audio.
We can save to audio. It's possible to save it as an MP3 file and then connect an MP3 player, or maybe save it to a memory stick and then plug that stick into an MP3 player, and then you could just listen to the file on that device. And of course MP3 players are now very common on smartphones and so on, so it's a very handy way of students, for example, scanning multiple pages, saving to audio, and then instead of having to open up OpenBook on their laptop, on the bus or whatever, they could just listen to the MP3 text just on their smartphone.
Edit. Edit mode. Acquire. Workflow. Submenu.
I'm going back to the acquire menu and coming to the workflow, which is the first section, the first menu item, and I'm just going to go into that.
Acquire and rechecked.
And the way I opened that was just I pressed my right arrow key and that opened up the various workflows here. And the first workflow, the one with the tick, the checked one, is acquire and read. Sorry, Jesse, you put a message up about you can't save files elsewhere. Do you mean on a version of OpenBook that you already have? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I do agree, Jesse. the file structure for OpenBook is quite a long path with the default, and you may need to just go into the settings as to where you would prefer to check. You can just set your default folder, so it's a little easier to find. It's a very long path through program files, user settings, OpenBook, blah blah blah. So oftentimes people will go into the settings menu and they will change the path to where they save their files. I'll have a quick look at that right now.
Acquire. Settings.
So in the settings menu, we have a general settings tab.
Settings. Leaving menus. OpenBook settings. General settings page. Startup document. Open untitled document. Radio button. Checked.
The OpenBook settings are available in a multi-tab format. So we have 7 tabs. To navigate with the keyboard between these tabs, we use Control tab.
Speech settings page.
Workflow settings page. Visual settings page. Note taker settings page. Keyboard settings page. Image views page.
That's the 7th.
General settings
and back
page.
to the general settings
Startup
page.
document. Open untitled document.
We can
Radio
then,
button.
once I'm in that
Checked.
particular, in this case I want to be in general settings, I can then use the tab key
Default print
to move
font
between the
settings
controls.
Combo box set. Default print font setting. Default file settings format. Default file settings location. Edit box C. Program files x86 Freedom Scientific OpenBook 9.0 users default library.
Okay, and I could then use the browse button to the right of that to browse to another folder, perhaps the desktop or your documents folder or something like that. Apply that, and then that OpenBook will always save to that location. When I say apply that, there is an apply button here that will apply to this session of OpenBook. OpenBook's not dynamically saving your settings as we go. It's very important that if I apply a change, any change within these settings,
Please note dial.
I haven't made it. It's very important that I save my settings by going to the settings menu
Settings.
and then down to save the settings.
Settings. Save the settings.
Now this will remember things like the fonts I've used, the color schemes and all of that. And in this case, of course, I want to change the file location.
Save settings dialog.
And when I
Enter
save the
new
settings,
file name.
it assumes that I
Edit
want
box
it to be the
format.
default file, and that is generally the case. But I could choose to give it another configuration name in case I wanted to use different settings in different conditions. But here I just default is the default setting there. I'm just going to press enter.
Please note dialog. File default already exists. Do you want to override it? Yes. Out of dialog.
And every time I make a change that I like, I need to go through that process. Settings, save the settings, save default settings, overwrite. Otherwise, of course, OpenBook will just start up with the previous settings that it last knew. I just want to go back to workflow.
Hello.
Settings. Advanced. Launch. To view. Acquire. Acquire and rechecked.
And so the default is acquire and read, but we can also have some of these preset workflows. Acquire image only. What this means is scan the page, but save it just as an image. Don't actually do any processing. So this is obviously used for speed. You might want to just quickly scan something, but not process it at that time. What you would then do is you would process it at another time.
Acquire in background.
Acquire in background allows you to be listening to the page you've just scanned, but then to continue to acquire more pages in the background. So you could, sometimes it might take a couple of minutes to listen to a page, and it'd be nice to be able to carry on scanning whilst that was happening.
Mail sorter preview.
Mail sorter preview is something, because OpenBook was developed in the United States, this is really only specific to the United States mail system and the way that their envelopes are constructed. So it was designed so that people could pop an envelope into the scanner, and it would basically quickly acquire the address and read who it is from and who's it to. There's no reason why you couldn't just use acquire a page and it would do the same thing. It's just the mail sorter preview has been set to a shorter page length.
Multi-page automatic.
Multi-page automatic. This is where you want the scanner, and this is usually a camera scanner like the Pearl, to scan a page, and then as soon as it's ready, allow you to turn the page, and it would detect the motion of you turning the page and then take the next picture and the next one and the next one. So you don't actually need to touch the keyboard, because OpenBook is detecting the turning of the page and then taking the page just as you turn those pages. So it's a very rapid way of getting through a chapter in a book. So these, just to remind you, are all presets that have been tweaked so that OpenBook operates in a certain way. It's what we mean by the concept of workflow.
Multi-page prompt for pages.
Multi-page prompt for pages is the same thing, except that it waits for you to press the spacebar to scan the next page.
Poetry and recipe.
Poetry and recipe, it sounds a bit strange. Now, what this is a workflow that's been tweaked to read certain layouts better. And what I mean by that is, if we think about, let's say, a poem, when we read a poem, we don't want it to automatically read to the next line. We want to digest the line by line, and I mean that's why we lay them out in the way they are. And so this way a person could actually have it laid out preserving the line by line format. So when they enlarge it slightly, it still preserves that format, and also when they listen to it, it will actually pause slightly at the end of the line. Same for recipes. When we're listening to a recipe, we don't want it to go charging ahead. We want to pause and reflect about what we've just heard. 3 cups of this, oil for 20 minutes, and so on. We want it chunked line by line, and that workflow is designed to do that. So how do we make changes to workflow? Maybe we want to adjust it slightly so that it suits us a bit better. We do this through the settings.
View, spell check, launch, advanced, save the settings.
And we go down to workflow settings.
Retrieve, delete setting, enable speech, general setting, speech setting, workflow settings, leaving menus, OpenBook settings, workflow settings page, workflow name, list box, acquire and read current.
And it lands on the acquire and read current workflow. So in the workflow box I'm in at the moment, it's just showing the presets, the ones I showed you before, and a couple of others. And it allows us to modify those workflows. We can then also create a new workflow based on the template, if you like, that we're just focused on. So to modify that, we just tab over. Let's say I want to modify the acquire and read. I just tab over.
Modify button.
And press enter. Or if I wanted to create a new one from that one, I would tab over.
Workflow create new button.
So I'm going to create a new one, let's say.
Workflow, acquire page, acquisition mode, combo box single.
So I might back out of that. This is going to be in 2 parts, and I kind of want to show you everything in one.
Out of dial, workflow modify, workflow, acquire page. And
I'm just going to use the modify button for the acquire and read workflow. And what OpenBook does is it splits the workflow into 2 parts. Each of them have got a tab. There's a tab for the acquire part of the process and the processing part. And once again, we can move between them with the Control Tab key.
Process page, acquire page.
And then use the Tab key to move between the various things. though I don't have time to go into vast detail with all of the ins and outs, I'm just going to walk you through the sorts of things you can do. And these tweaks can be very useful for people who are totally blind, who, though they can't guess the outcome of a particular document because, of course, they can't see the document, they can experiment with the workflow to change things like the resolution, the color mode, and so on, the contrast. They might just change one setting at a time and see whether they get a better result by making that tweak. So the options we have in the acquire, and the acquire process is of course the scanning process, are, I'll just point to the major parts. The main one that we might tweak would be
image properties, color mode, combo box,
possibly the color mode, but we normally leave that in grayscale. This is all to do with the amount of pixels that it's looking at when it's processing the picture.
Image properties, resolution, combo box 300.
And the resolution. The resolution is the dots per inch that the scanners were operating at. And you would think that if we increase the resolution, we might get a better result because there are more dots per inch. And that is sometimes true, and it's particularly true where very fine print is used. Business cards, or very, very fine print, like say 6 point or something like that. Sometimes all you need to do is go into the resolution and just increase it slightly. And to change this setting, we press the down arrow.
400, 500, 600.
And 600 is, I think, the maximum. Yeah, 600 is the maximum. And you might then tab over to the apply button and then try scanning another page and see if that's improved the recognition quality for that document. I have to say though that generally 300 works very, very well. Sometimes I might need to just increase it to 400, but very rarely to 600. And sometimes increasing the resolution actually makes the recognition worse. It's almost like it's overthinking it. So generally we would leave it at 300.
300.
The next setting is the
acquisition size, full device length.
This would apply mainly to those typical flatbed scanners that they have a moving light that scans at the A4 page. And if you know that your document is only half A4, why would you waste time scanning the whole length? So this gives you the opportunity to use a slider to change it to half or third length or whatever, just to speed up the scanning process.
Adjust image automatic contrast, checkbox, checked.
The next one is adjust image automatic contrast, and this could have a bearing on some documents. Automatic contrast is usually the best to leave it on, but sometimes we find that a document has been poorly photocopied. The worst case is where there's a black band down one side, either the top or the side, or perhaps some kind of shading because they couldn't close the lid properly on the scanner or the photocopier, or what we call the tent effect, where it's a thick book, they put it on a photocopier or on the scanner, and because they can't flatten it because it's such a springy book, in the gutter of the book you'll get a lot of shading. And sometimes you'll find that automatic contrast might not be the best setting here. So to change it to a manual contrast adjustment, we would just
out of dialogue. Workflow, acquire image output, adjust image automatic.
We press the space bar to uncheck the automatic contrast. I pressed the enter key just by force of habit. I should have pressed the space bar.
Adjust image automatic contrast, check.
And then I can tab to the contrast and I can slide left or right.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And we started, I think, at 8, which is halfway. And the lower the number, it was trying to adjust for a presumed darker image, and the higher the number, a presumed bleached out or lighter image. Now, what's going to actually work, we don't know until we try it. So what I would recommend you do is just try notch by notch, getting darker or lighter, and seeing if the resulting scan improves. And what, of course, I mean by improve is whether it makes less of a mess with the spoken words. The other settings within the acquire section are just simply whether it makes noises as it's acquiring the document, and then whether the new page is appended to the current page, and that is the default for acquire and read, but you can change it here in the page placement control. And finally, the section about multi-page acquisition, which is greyed out because the workflow is not set for multi-page, is whether it will prompt for pages and so on. That's the acquisition part. The next one is the processing part, and I'll use the Control Tab key.
Process page. Recognition use default. Recognition. Checkbox. Checked.
And the first section is about what we call recognition engine is OpenBook using to process the acquired image. Now, OpenBook has three engines in it, and if I just uncheck the use default.
Recognition use default. Recognition strategy. Combo box balanced.
The one that it's using is called balanced, but I can choose
fastest
or
balanced. Fastest, most accurate.
Balanced, fastest, or most accurate. So the balanced is the one that we generally use. The fastest is if you want to quickly get through things, and the quality of the original is well printed. You can set it to fastest just to speed up the process. If you really want it to spend more time processing each pixel and getting the best recognition it can, choose the most accurate as the recognition engine. Having said that, I have often found that using the most accurate often will provide no better than, if not worse than, the balanced mode. It will very much depend on the document, but yet it does seem strange that sometimes you switch to most accurate and yet it doesn't produce any better quality in the actual recognized output.
Fastest, balanced.
With modern computers, laptops, the processing is really quite quick, so some of these issues of fastest and so on are less relevant, so you can actually pretty much stick with the balanced. The next section is about languages. What this means is when it's looking at a document, what character set and what language is it going to be assuming the original was? And we generally have it set to English, United States. But if you know that there's going to be, if it's a French document, of course, you probably switch it to French for either language 1 or language 2. OpenBook can actually apply two recognition engines at the same time. This is really powerful where, for example, you might be studying a textbook which is maybe in English but with, say, French inserts. And so you could set language 2 to French and it would have no trouble with the particular French symbols like the cedillas and the circumflex and that sort of stuff. Okay. Moving on to the image processing section, we have the concept of whether we keep the exact view or not. The exact view is what we're seeing in the lower part of the screen. So if you're the only person using this and you are totally blind, then you might not need to keep the exact view because it is kind of meaningless. What you would be keeping is the text that has been recognized. So to save space, because all images do take up a bit of space, you might choose to uncheck the keep exact view, just to save a bit of space. In the image processing area, we also have image announce orientation. This is whether OpenBook announces as it's scanning pages upside down, pages right side up, and so on. Sometimes that's useful to hear and to know that you have it this way around or that way around. We also have the despeckle option. Now this can have a bearing on the quality of the output. Oftentimes a page when it's scanned is speckled, and this may be because it's on recycled paper, or it could be that it's just a photocopy of a photocopy. And what OpenBook has some algorithms to actually remove things that look like speckles. So they're not as round as a full stop, and they're not, or a comma, but they are about that sort of size or smaller. And OpenBook can go through the image and just basically rub out or discard or ignore any speckles like that. Otherwise it might treat those as full stops and save them, of course. So the despeckle option is usually checked. And in the page layout, just to the right of that, we have the ability to choose whether it's ignoring columns or recognizing columns. So you see here how we could take a template like the acquire and read workflow and make just a couple of minor modifications for certain situations. And maybe it's a certain document. Maybe you regularly receive a certain document, maybe a certain bill or something, and you've made a tweak that you think works really well with this particular document. So you can just modify the workflow and create a new one with a different name like gas bill or something like that, so that you just simply invoke that workflow rather than the vanilla one that comes with OpenBook. All right, so finally in the text processing area, there's the ability to simply discard any blank pages, and of course some documents, some books will have blank pages, and rather than keeping them in the document, you would simply discard them. You can also, and I haven't mentioned this, but OpenBook can apply a set of common OCR corrections. This is a list of common misrecognitions that can be corrected almost like an autocorrect in a word processor. And at the moment I've got it set to apply these OCR corrections, but you can choose not to have them applied automatically. Text emphasis is to do with things like bold, and OpenBook can choose to keep that or to not keep it. There is an option to replace uncertain text. What this means is that if OpenBook can't determine that a particular letter in the word is a particular letter, simply because it wasn't able to recognize it clearly, you can choose to use a certain symbol to indicate that. Rather than having a stab at it, putting an A in or an E or something, you can choose to put a particular character. And the default one here is an asterisk, but you could choose a caret or a circumflex or something like that, just to indicate, okay, OpenBook was struggling with this. And you can also choose to preserve line breaks, like a double line between paragraphs as well. These are the kind of tweaks that you can make to modify your workflow. And when you've made a change, you just apply it.
Process page.
And
Recognition used
and OK.
Out of dialogue.
Don't forget that if you've made a change, you may wish to go to save in the settings menu. Otherwise, it won't be remembered next time. I'm going to mention here a couple of workflows that are not well known. I mentioned about the acquiring background and so on, but there are a couple of workflows here that I'd like to mention. There is Acquire in Word and Freedom Import Printer. Now, when you install OpenBook on a computer, if you have Microsoft Word, Word can be modified. Sorry, Lisa, you just made a comment about, I'll just bring that comment up again.
OpenBook 9.0.
If you check text emphasis and emboss in Braille, would it have symbol indicator for bold? No, I don't think what you're saying there about whether it would show the bold Braille bold symbol there. Your JAWS would see that was in bold and would say that it was in bold if you had your JAWS set to that, but I don't think your Braille would indicate that this was in bold. Sorry about that, Lisa, but I could also check that because I may be wrong. The acquiring Word, when you install OpenBook, it can actually modify Word so that within Word itself you can scan using OpenBook. So this could be that you might be working in Word and you decide, oh, I want to scan something with OpenBook. You can actually go into a Word menu and acquire directly into Word. So this, you won't even see OpenBook start up. OpenBook would start up, but it would open up in the background. So it's important then that you are able in your workflow settings to modify the performance of that acquire in Word, and they call it a speciality workflow. So that you can make the kind of changes I showed you before and apply them or correct them or modify the acquire in Word workflow. Because this is all going to happen like a black box in the background. It'll just simply scan straight into Word using the settings that you have in your acquiring Word workflow. So the other one is the Freedom Import Printer. The Freedom Import Printer is if you like, a virtual printer, and Freedom refers to the fact that OpenBook is a Freedom Scientific program, and Freedom Scientific is the manufacturer. And so what this is let's say you had a document in a word processing program, or maybe it was a PDF document and you were looking at it and you wanted to print it directly into OpenBook. It could perhaps be, let's say, an inaccessible PDF. It might be an image-only PDF that somebody has emailed you. You could, of course, open that in OpenBook using the Open menu. But if you happen to just be, let's say you were an email and you'd opened it and it opened your Adobe and there it was, an inaccessible PDF, you could print from Adobe, select the Freedom Import Printer as the printer, and what it would do is it would pipe that straight into OpenBook and it would use the processing and it would process as if you had scanned it. So this can be quite a powerful and very convenient way of handling inaccessible PDFs, for example, or any other image that contains text. In other words, it's a virtual printer. And the settings here in the workflow settings are ways of adjusting the way it performs, the dots per inch and all that sort of thing. Okay, that's a run through of the workflow settings in OpenBook. Are there any questions about anything I've been over so far, or would anybody like me to go back over anything there at all?
I think so.
Okay.
No questions?
Rebecca, have you got anything that I've missed or you'd like me to go over?
I don't think so. What was I going to? The only thing I was going to say, there's in the file menu, there's an option for Braille and then there's an option for emboss. Now the Braille, just wondering can't remember what the differences between those are.
Braille.
Oh, so that's import a Braille. Okay, so that's to import a Braille file. Okay.
Yeah, so you can import a Braille file, an electronic Braille file, of course, and you can also export the current file to Braille format. Now, so this is not embossing it. This is actually, if you had a grade, if you wanted to export it in grade 2, contracted Braille, but electronically, of course, as a BRF file or something like that, you can do it from here, and it will create a text file, but it will be a Braille text file. And then, of course, you could specify where that is, and then you could load that into your Braille note taker, and then it would be in grade 2 on the Braille note taker. If that makes sense. Whereas emboss, of course, will assume you have an embosser attached, and it will send it straight to the embosser.
So, yeah. No,
I
think that was about it.
Speech settings page.
Just to remember, Dale, I should just mention about speech. In the settings menu under the speech settings, you can choose different synthesizers. We're hearing Australian voices at the moment, but we could download from the Freedom Scientific website other voices as well, including other languages. One of my customers actually is a Danish speaker, and he actually has it set to Danish, and it will speak Danish very well. So he swaps between English and Danish. And there are many, many languages that it can speak.
Yeah.
And you can change the rate and the pitch and so on. The other thing is you can tell it how much it speaks when it's speaking, whether it speaks everything, whether it will speak numbers as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whether it will speak them as 1,200 and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Whether capital letters are spoken as typing and so on. So these are features that will be handy for blind users as they're typing or reviewing the document.
Okay. And there are a couple of tools. I mean, we're a bit short on time, but we can always do things another day. But there are things like the pronunciation dictionaries and things like that you can adjust as well in the tools.
Yes, that's very important. The pronunciation dictionary, yes, and this is something that's true in JAWS as well. The ability to, and a classic example is, let's say all your documentation was, say, about health and safety, and it was full of acronyms. Sometimes it will try and say the acronym as if it was a word, and that could be very annoying. An example of that would be one of our universities, University of Queensland. It will say UQ, not as UQ, but UC, which is very annoying, as almost every sentence has the word UQ in it. So what they do is, of course, they go into the pronunciation dictionary.
Pronunciation dictionary dialogue.
And they type in the word.
Q.
And they then retype it
Q.
as
word edit box.
As that you want it to be pronounced. So this way, when you're listening to documents, it will say it as you want it to be pronounced. Thanks for reminding me about that, Rebecca. That's a very
I don't know if we've got anyone from Western Australia, but I know when I was there, you quite often got things that said WA, and it would say that as Washington, as in Washington State, because it's American. So we'd have to change it to Western Australia.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of things like that. So yeah, I think that and there's a launch menu into Word, and it's a launch to Duxbury as well.
Yes, there is indeed launch to Duxbury. So it's possible to launch these programs directly from within OpenBook, and to transmit the scan into those programs. So that works really well with Duxbury, where you can launch the file straight into Duxbury. Duxbury is the Braille translator, of course. So,
Okay, no, that's great. Thanks, Peter. Has anyone got any last questions before we wrap it up? No.
I better hand back to you.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So. Okay, so thank you, Peter, for all that. That's great. And thanks to everybody for attending. So if you do think of questions afterwards at any time, or have any feedback about our webinars, or if our OpenBook, if you're not already using it, is available as a trial. So in 40-minute mode, or if you'd like a demonstration in person or anything, then by all means contact us, 1300 883 853, or email info@quantumrlv.com.au, and we can also give you pricing and things as well. So yeah, that's about it. So thanks everybody. I'll end the meeting, and I will